Glenn, what's up?
I
We can move on down there.
a big thing.
How's it going? From the other end of the bench.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this regular meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Bryan,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Ellison,
Here.
Commissioner Gay,
Here.
Commissioner Hunter, Commissioner Stewart,
Here.
Commissioner Stockdale,
Here.
Commissioner Strange,
Here.
and myself. All are present.
Good. I declare the meeting in order. Ms. Womack, would you announce the posting of advertisement for this meeting, please?
The agenda was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on October 25th. It was amended and reposted on October 27th, October 31st, and November 1st. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. The first matter on our agenda today is the continued discussion and possible approval of a report of the Planning Commission in response to that certain resolution of the mayor and commissioners of the city of Rehoboth Beach pursuant to Title 22 Delaware Code Section 708 concerning a potential alteration or vacation of a portion of Baltimore Avenue at its easterly terminus, which includes the impacts, both positive and negative, of the proposed alteration or vacation. We had this matter discussed at length yesterday. I believe counsel for the Planning Commission was to put together a final version incorporating the suggested changes from yesterday's discussion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have that document?
I do, and I will. I'm going to show the public document that's been posted on the portal, and then, as we discussed yesterday, I will simply read verbatim the proposed changes to the existing document to maximize transparency, and then assuming that you all approve the report, then the report would be signed and, of course, be made publicly available in its final form.
All right, please go ahead.
So I'm literally going to go through all of the changes that I propose you to consider for purposes of modification of the report that's was posted on yesterday's agenda. So draft comes off, November blank becomes November 3. Page 2, again, November blank becomes November 3, which is today. At the suggestion of this commission, I have drafted and will read into the record a proposed preamble or new section 3, which would be inserted before this section 3 to read as follows. I will read it out loud. So this will be a new Roman numeral 3, preliminary observations and recommendations. The Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission seeks to provide constructive input and guidance to the Board of Commissioners in connection with the referral. Unfortunately, the timing of the referral places the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission in an awkward position. On the one hand, the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission is cognizant that, one, the Rehoboth Beach Patrol project otherwise seems to be shovel-ready, and two, the Delaware Code provision prompting the referral indicates the Board of Commissioners can act within 45 days of the referral, regardless of whether the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission returns a report. On the other hand, as set forth below, a more detailed and complete record of the proposed abandonment, including its positive and negative impacts, is necessary to conduct the type of assessment the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission believes is necessary here. The Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission conducted an initial public meeting 1 week after the referral was made and prepared a draft report based on the October 6, 2023 meeting for consideration during a special meeting on November 2 and again during a regular meeting on November 3, 2023. But the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission did not have adequate time under these circumstances to conduct a comprehensive investigation, including by way of a public hearing. And then the additional new language includes a new recommendation based on your direction yesterday. Recommendation, under these circumstances, the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommends that the Board of Commissioners schedule and conduct a public hearing to address and assess more fully and comprehensively the issues identified herein. In connection with such a public hearing, the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommends that the city ensure and establish a record of the provision of adequate written notice to all the contiguous and non-contiguous property owners and businesses located along the 2 blocks of Baltimore Avenue. So that is the proposed new language for Roman numeral 3. There's a typo under recommendation here. It's instead of RCPC, it'll be RBPC. And then based on the discussion and direction yesterday, under C, this recommendation is proposed to be amended to read as follows. Under C, recommendation, the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommends that the Board of Commissioners ensure that any agreements or understandings reached between the city and the adjacent property owners related to the proposed abandonment be confirmed in writing, and the insert here is, and be made available to the public for review. And the final substantive change to the draft report from yesterday is under D. So the recommendation under D is proposed to be amended as follows. The Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommends that the Board of Commissioners address whether the proposed abandonment will impact, insert a new parenthetical, or impair the proper functioning of, close paren, pick up with the existing language, infrastructure, such as sewer lines, stormwater drains, insert a new phrase, stormwater management, and then return to the existing language, and any underground power lines. The Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission also recommends that the Board of Commissioners evaluate and determine whether the pavers shown on the Davis-Bowen presentation should be pervious in nature. And finally, again, November blank would be changed to November 3.
Thank you. Members of the commission, you've heard the changes. Are there any further discussion on this report? Yes, Ms. Davis.
I have no issue with the changes that Mr. Mehta just read, but I do want to take note of the fact that we received a letter from Harvey Schulman, a property owner and resident of the city, who raised a lot of, I think, important issues, and I think everybody would agree. Yesterday, we discussed, or I think we agreed, that Mr. Schulman should be asked to submit his letter to the Board of Commissioners. And for the same reasons that are set forth in Mr. Mehta's revised letter, we don't have the time, the staff, or the resources to investigate those issues, but I think they're important, and I think they should be the subject brought up. Mr. Schulman, if he wants to, raise them at the public hearing and leave it for the Board of Commissioners to deal with, because that's where the staffing and the resources and the answers, or at least the possible resolution of those issues, lies.
Okay. Anything further? Do I have a motion to approve this report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, I will sign the report, and I believe it's going to appear on the Board of Commissioners agenda for Monday morning. It'll be embedded today, yes, but their meeting takes place on Monday morning. Okay. All right. Thank everyone for your hard work and our ability to turn this around quickly. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. All right, the next matter on our agenda is the continued discussion and possible consideration of a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners on revision, no, I'm sorry, we're not doing 236 today. Yeah. What this has to do is the proposed revisions to Chapter 236, Subdivision of Land and Site Review. We discussed this at length yesterday, and let's defer this until our December meeting. There needs to be more time for additional revisions to what is being revised, and some significant issues were raised yesterday, I think. Mr. Robertson, not forced. You're a lot taller. So, yes, we hear you, and we would like to have an opportunity to give this further thought, and we'll bring it back at our December meeting. The next matter is new business. There are 3 applications that have been filed for concept plan review. They will be presented, as I understand it, together by Mr. Robertson. These are concept review of site plan review application number 0323-01 for 413 Rehoboth Avenue for property located in the C1 zoning district, lot 137 of Rehoboth Avenue. The same basic thing with a different application number, 0323-02 for 415 Rehoboth Avenue, and application number 0323-03 for 417 Rehoboth Avenue. Mr. Robertson, it's your floor. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me, by way of introduction from the Planning Commission's status and viewpoint, the purpose of a project concept review and discussion is to provide the Planning Commission with the opportunity at one or more meetings to informally review the applicant's potential development before the applicant commits substantial time and expense preparing a formal site plan for the proposed development. That language is listed out of City Code Section 236-31A. In addition, the Planning Commission and the applicant shall review and discuss any issues or concerns related to the proposed project at this review today. Following the project concept review and discussion, the Planning Commission will provide non-binding written comments and suggestions based upon its experience, knowledge, technical assistance, and public comments. The Planning Commission shall take no action to approve or deny the concept or any details of a proposed development at the project concept review and discussion. That language is found in City Code Section 236-31C. And last, it's especially important that the Planning Commission keep an open mind at this stage regarding any ultimate approval or denial of the project at a later stage. It is appropriate, indeed necessary, to raise potential issues or concerns at this stage, but that should be done in the context of issue spotting, not issue resolution. Having said that, Mr. Robertson, that will be permanent, by the way.
Just as long as you call him Mr. Robertson. I want that to go
right.
both ways.
I don't want to offend him.
Oh, wow.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Vince Robertson with Parkowski, Yerk, and Swayze, and I'm here on behalf of the 3 applications that were just described. As was stated, I'm going to consolidate sort of just general background, and then we'll go into each of the 3 designs in a little more detail. I do have, you'll be shocked to hear, a short PowerPoint. I'm not going to spend like a whole lot of time on it, but this is our first opportunity to be in front of you. We want to tell the story how we got from point A to point B. I am here with Dave McCarthy, who's the builder and the owner of the entities, and with Jeff Shilkoff, who is the architect. He's with the design group. He's actually done several projects that I think are well received and sort of cornerstone projects or example projects, we'll get to in a moment, in Rehoboth Beach. And then Roger Gross, who's a professional engineer who worked on the site plan. Just brief history of the site, I think we all kind of know it. It's had a somewhat tortured history a little bit in recent times. These were 3 lots that were owned by Mame Witzel. One of them had a small cottage on it that was actually preserved and moved off on the other side of Route 1. Now they're vacant. Mame sold those to ClearSpace. I'm not going to go through that history. I think we all know it to some degree. ClearSpace ultimately decided, for whatever reason, that they didn't want to proceed, and Mr. McCarthy, through his entities, purchased the 3 lots. They are 3 separate lots. They're separately titled. So with that and with that history, one of the things Mr. McCarthy and his design team wanted to do was not create any controversy, look at what would be something that is code compliant. We looked at sort of the fact that it's at the gateway to Rehoboth Avenue. This is sort of the doorstep to Rehoboth Beach, if you think about it. You come around the circle, and this is one of the primary properties. It's the first thing you see if you come up Rehoboth Avenue. It's the commercial corridor of the city. It's compliant with the comp plan's sort of directives and wish lists. I'll not go through those. I thought Wallace Montgomery did a good job of outlining those in their 3 reports. It's consistent with the city's architecture, which we'll get to in a moment. And the other thing is, I think it's really beneficial to the city because it revitalizes the west end of Rehoboth Avenue. If you think about Rehoboth Avenue right now, we've got these 3 vacant lots. It's anchored with no shade thrown on Royal Farms, but a Royal Farms. There's not a lot of vitality at that end of Rehoboth Avenue until you get the other side of the circle with Rehoboth Beach Museum, and we have the farmers market. But this one block could use a little bit of a facelift, particularly now because they're sitting there with vacant lots. With regard to these projects, there were multiple meetings between our design team and Mr. Janis. I think there were something like 4 of those that occurred before even got to the point of formal submission for site plan review. The actual site plan review application was way back in April 5th, 2023. So at this point, something like 6 months ago, 5 or 6 months ago, that we've been in the queue. Matt did an initial review of the plans, all 3 of those. There was an exchange of information based on Matt's review. There were revised plans that were submitted, which are the ones that you all have. We ultimately got the report from Wallace Montgomery on August 20th. Well, it was dated August 25th. We didn't receive it till September 20th. There were some comments in there, as I mentioned to a couple people offline. We actually debated whether we should submit a second set of revised plans based on some of those Wallace Montgomery comments. But our hope was we would get in front of you all in a timely fashion. And if we submitted revised plans, it would send it all back through plan review. And so since we're doing concept review now, it just made the most sense to keep them where they are, acknowledge some of those comments, and keep moving forward. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that background history. For example, a couple of the things that we know we have to address are the height discrepancies. We're compliant with the height, but there was Matt's measurement or Wallace Montgomery's measurements came up with different numbers, and we can certainly fix that. There was FAR overages. I don't know if they were all the same, but they were about 0.09 over on FAR, like 420 some feet. We're going to fix those. I just don't see those as real big issues. So with that, I'm going to go through this PowerPoint briefly, hopefully, and then Jeff's going to come forward and talk more about the technical aspects of the site plan and the design for the 3 spots. So this is just a rendering. You all might have seen it in the Cape Gazette of what, I'm big on what are things going to look like in real life. I think that takes a little bit of the fear of the unknown out of the conversations. Even if you're looking at blueprint style elevations, if you can see a 3-dimensional rendering, you get an idea of what these structures are really going to look like. And I think, hopefully that you all find that they're attractive and in character and will be an asset to Rehoboth Avenue. Just for the sake of reference, this is what they look like now. I'm going from west to east. This is from the city's files and also what was embedded in the agenda, 417, 415, and 413. Those are just the way it is now if you drive by. Again, at the entrance to Rehoboth Beach, kind of on Rehoboth Beach's doorstep. So one of the things that we always like to look at, it's not actually codified anywhere, but the city did a design manual back in 2007. And I've relied on it some, other people have relied on it. I think it's a useful tool to show not only sort of the designs of Rehoboth as they exist, but also, going forward, what we want things to look like. And some of these photographs, I think, are instructive to our project. I think there's the Wooden Indians, the top right. We've got the Camel's Hump and Eden, the middle right, in terms of commercial, and then the top left. That is, I forget what it's called right now. It used to be an embroidery shop, as I recall. But those are mixed-use structures. They're all formal residential structures where there's residential on top and commercial on the bottom. And in these 3 cases, I think they were all conversions of residential structures. So anyhow, that's just the cover sheet of that. I'm not going to read all this, but it talks about the architectural characteristics of Rehoboth, talks about primary and secondary forms of varying heights, front and side porches, roof lines that are important in defining buildings. Gable roofs are the things that the city wants in its architectural characteristics. It continues with, the types of houses we have in Rehoboth with narrow lots, often with the house sited with the gable end facing the street, which we have. Secondary entrances located in the front facing gable, 2.5-story gable front buildings. Again, exactly what we're proposing for Rehoboth Avenue with this project. There's some design principles in the manual. I'm going to go just quickly. The principles are integrity of architectural design. I think we covered that. Sensitivity to the city and the neighborhood context. We'll get to that in a moment, but I think that's satisfied in that it's similar to so many other neighborhoods and structures in the city. Actually, it's somewhat more in scale with the city compared to the condominium building that's right next to these 3 lots. There's human-scaled architecture and pedestrian-oriented design. Again, that's a welcoming front porch sort of idea on all 3 of these structures that sort of draws the people and pedestrians into these projects instead of just driving by on Rehoboth Avenue. Preservation of structures with architectural merit, that doesn't really apply. We're not preserving anything. They're vacant. But I think we are constructing something that has architectural merit and is consistent with the 180 and 60 and 70-year-old structures we have in Rehoboth. And then environmentally friendly design, green architecture. This is served by HVAC through geothermal. So it's not only green, but that eliminates the need for outside condensers and that sort of thing, which maybe wouldn't be a big deal in commercial, but that eliminates those from having to be in the rear up against the residential properties. There's commercial requirements and demonstrate consistency in design composition, reflect character and context, be in scale with the surroundings, have appropriate mass and bulk, and reflect an appropriate rhythm. I'm going to get to those in a minute. One of the standards is integrity of architectural design. We see that there's the example of the old J. Con Scott building. That's a little more boxy than what we're proposing, but that's the same idea with residential over retail or commercial. Same thing with Claus. I think that's office space up top, but you can see there's the front porch idea, sort of the pedestrian-friendly, inviting entrance to the building. Same thing, sensitivity to city and neighborhood context. I circled the Camel's Hump and Eden at the bottom. Those are, exactly what we're proposing. Although I think with the old Camel's Hump, I forget what it's called now, but that porch is actually enclosed, whereas we're showing enclosed porches. The same thing with the 3 homes up on the corner of King Charles and Stokely. Ours are similar, honestly, in character to those. Although I would point out that the one on the corner has since been substantially renovated, and the one on the right side was torn down and built with something else. But it is a 2007 manual, and there's change in Rehoboth. But you get the idea that it's consistent with what we're talking about. And actually, if you look over here, it says these dwellings individually contribute to city character and neighborhood identity. I think if you just sort of look at that concept, that mirrors what I showed you on the first page of the PowerPoint. It also talks about porches. These are just pictures of porches throughout Rehoboth Beach. Again, that is an important architectural element that has been built into the 3 units that we're proposing today. Again, the design guidelines demonstrate consistency in design composition. This one is kind of the good versus the bad. The one on the left is the good, and I would suggest that ours is similar to that with the different roofs and gables and entrances and porch overhangs. This one is Eden, and I don't think that's residential up top, although it may be, versus a big square box with just windows and shutters. The one on the right where my cursor is what we don't want to do. The one on the left is what the city says we should try to do, endeavor to do, and I think we have. Another one is reflect the character and context. I think we do both of these. Again, it shows residential over retail on an appropriate scale. There's actually sort of 5 things that most of the commercial buildings in Rehoboth are characterized by, 4 things. We satisfy 2 of those. The first, we satisfy single businesses and converted home cottage structures, primarily with wood cedar siding. Ours aren't converted structures, but they are designed to appear to look like converted structures. And the bottom one was mixed-use buildings with residential above commercial. So we actually satisfy 2 of the 4 items in that guideline. The other one is be in scale with the surroundings. I think we are, although we're more akin to this one in the top right, although in reverse. In this case, that old house or cottage was there, and then the hotel was built next to it, and it sort of, as it says, overshadows that building. We have the building overshadowing us. We're looking to build the cottage-style structure next to that big condominium on Rehoboth Avenue. The next guideline is have an appropriate mass and bulk. Again, this one, top right, is what we don't want, and these 2 are more akin to what we do want or what we endeavor to do. This is, obviously the old Seahorse Ocean Atlantic. At this point, I don't know that that's an example anybody wants to rely on given its current situation, eyeball-wise. But anyhow, this is the other one, Monograms Unlimited. That's a smaller structure, but that's the same sort of idea where it's residential over retail. That one is a converted cottage. Again, ours isn't a converted cottage, but it is one that we hope looks like a converted cottage. Then the final guideline is reflect an appropriate rhythm. Again, we really strive to do that. The top left is Penny Lane. Although there's no residential in Penny Lane, it's designed to look like that, be a neighborhood, pedestrian-friendly scale. Clause, again, the same thing. It's a converted house or cottage with a restaurant on the bottom, but maintains the porches with a residential appearance on the top. This is the corner of Baltimore and First Street. J. Con Scott and the Wooden Indian and Eden and the Camel's Hump. Again, mirroring exactly what we're looking to do on Rehoboth Avenue. And then this is just another view from the other end on Baltimore Avenue. But just shows that what we're proposing is consistent with the historical development of Rehoboth. I'm not going to go through all this. It just talks about roof form and pitch. We didn't want to come in with a flat roof. We wanted gables. We wanted some architectural diversity with these 3 structures. So as I said, I'm big on examples of what things really look like versus, what you might think something will look like that may or may not be right, And so a lot of times we have to do 3D renderings through our architectural team. They can develop that based on the plans and fill in the colors and everything else. Here we're actually fortunate that we have an example of what we're looking to do that was designed, approved, and built that I think is a good example of a mixed-use structure in Rehoboth Beach that actually, I think, gets comments on being, a nice-looking building that fits in well with Wilmington Avenue. It's, again, 48 Wilmington Avenue. You can go by anytime. To the right of that on this picture is Salt Air and, I'm forgetting what the other one is, Henlopen City. Yeah, I go to both of them. I can't believe it. Anyhow, so it's just east of that. Residential over retail. It was designed and approved, and then the approvals were 2018. The construction proceeded after that, but it's open now with Hunton Lane on the first floor and residential space above. This was sort of, in addition to what I just talked about with the design manual, this is what Dave went to Jeff and Roger with and said, look, we want to build a project that's not going to have any controversy, that we know the city likes and is approved already. And that way, it shouldn't create any problems. We should be able to build it, and it'll be an asset to the city, particularly at the location what we're talking about. So again, it avoids fear of the unknown and gives you an example of exactly what we're talking about. And hopefully with that in mind, you'll see fit to approve these concepts and these plans. I would like to point out, because there were some questions on the plans, we actually have the plans from the city, from the city's files. This is the cover sheet, and you can see the city stamp right here that says they were approved. That's the west elevation, again with the city's approval down the bottom right. That's the east elevation. Shows all the decks, the spiral staircase, the structure, everything else. This just shows the south and north elevation, the front and rear elevations. And then this one shows the first floor plan, again approved by the city and the way it was built today. And just because there was a question about the setbacks, I just did want to point out that this building, as it sits today and as it was approved, it's hard to see on this, but from here to here is a 12-foot setback that accommodates the driveway down the side. And then on this side, it's a 1-foot setback from the sideline to the building. Again, this is C1 too, I should have pointed that out, just like our properties are. And then the second floor, plans are in there as well, approved by the city, built this way, spiral staircase, decks, and everything else. Again, that second floor is 12 foot off the west property line. The deck's 1 foot off the east property line, and it's 7'6" off that back property line. So that's the way it was built today and approved. So the reason I point that out is it just gives you a good real-life example of exactly what we're talking about that you can go look at. I know this is concept, so you have time to go look at it and see something that physically exists in the streetscape of Rehoboth. So with that, what I'd like to do is call Jeff up here. I'm going to put him on the spot and go through the site plan. Give me a second. There we go. So, Jeff, you're probably going to have to stand over here, and you can see it on the screen, too. Just because it needs to be picked up on the mic.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for having me here today.
I guess first, if you could, before you go into the site plan,
Yeah.
just for the benefit of the commission, maybe talk about some of the projects you have done in Rehoboth.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I grew up working.
Hello.
Yeah, so I have a pretty long history in Rehoboth. My family owned a business here. When I was a kid, I worked on the boardwalk on the roof when I was 10 or 11 years old. And that's about 50 years now, 60 years old, 60 years ago now. Probably the first significant project I did was the South Moon Under complex. But before that, South Moon Under was operating out of the Moore building, the yellow brick building on the corner of 2nd Street in Rehoboth there. And it's in your design manual as an example of a building that was tied together with good signage and banding. That was probably done in the late 80s, early 90s. Then I did the South Moon Under project for Frank Onion, and we designed the store and renovated that. I felt terrible that we had to tear down the old Mayhall McCabe building. That was a classic here. But we looked very, very hard at trying to save it, trying to make it. By then, the ADA was in place. We tried to make it accessible. We tried to look at whether it was structurally usable for South Moon Under, but we replaced it with something that I think I'm proud of and was an interesting building. It's also in your design manual. And then more recently, I did the project for the Avenue Inn and the addition, not the original building for Mr. Simpler Sr., but for Alex Moore and Ken Simpler Jr. And then I did the Cooper Cottages for them over at Sam Cooper's property over there. And then I designed the building that Vince just showed you on for Bob Pomerantz, the one where Hunton Lane is down below. Mr. McCarthy approached me. He actually, I think, found the building and searched for, like, who's the architect. I didn't have any previous connection with him.
Well, that's exactly it. I wanted to do
Dave,
some...
you have to come to the microphone.
Just some background. When we decided to purchase the lots, we wanted to do something that wasn't controversial, that we thought would be in fitting with the town. And, I was looking around town and the whole bit, and I started seeing these buildings, one being the one on Wilmington Ave. So I was like, who designed this? Who was the person that designed this? So make a long story short, I ended up foiling the blueprints, and then called Jeff and said, I love what you're doing. I think you'd be the perfect architect for this project. And that's just some background. That's how we kind of connected. So thank you.
So, so we try to do a pretty thorough preliminary review. As Vince suggested, we met with Matt several times. I met with the fire marshal a couple of times with Dwayne Fox. I've been through this enough to know that there's lots of issues and lots of complexity to your code and the process and all the different forces that help shape buildings here. I think Vince did a great job of describing the principles that we designed to, and I think the renderings kind of stand for themselves, but it's just in a nutshell, I would say we're trying to do a set of buildings on these different lots that provide enough variety to attract different kinds of businesses, a rich mix and diversity, to be pedestrian accessible and friendly on the street with the porches. And it's funny, we had this very early conversation about what the architectural style should be, and they were showing me some really interesting pictures of basically cute, nice places like in Lewis and in Nantucket and here and there and up in Rhode Island. And, what was characteristic to all of them was that they had more variety of architecture. So I've done some projects similar to this where someone wants it repetitive, like design one and just repeat it on all three. And that was some of the very early design schemes that I presented. But then we said, okay, what if we did them each slightly different? And I didn't even realize it, but that picture in the design manual that has the hip roof one in the middle, and it's got the cottage with the bungalow window on the right, and it's got the one with the gable face on the left. If you just switch those two, it's exactly what we wound up doing. So we're trying, what I was asked to do was develop a scheme that had variety, but high character, and everything fit together using all the kind of the traditional materials that appear in the design manual. And I guess as an aside, I would say that another thing that I've done is I've written the downtown design guidelines for Bethany Beach, for Ocean City, for Beach Haven, New Jersey, and I took a shot at the ones for Fenwick a few years ago, but Fenwick changed policies and never adopted it. But I have done a fair amount of thinking with citizen groups about, at the beach, what coastal character is and what kind of materials are appropriate, what kind of forms are appropriate. And I think built into your zoning is a fair amount of character-giving things with the scale and the roof pitches, and some of the things that are built into zoning, some of them are built into the design guidelines. So I'm available to answer any questions about any of that. Briefly, I guess on the site plan, they're valuable properties. We're trying to make commercially viable valuable development. So, the goal is to try to get as much commercial space on each lot as possible within all the regulations to provide the parking that's required. We've went over that pretty carefully with Mr. Janis. And to, when Dave says meet the codes without conflict, I mean, I think each lot is allowed a density of one single-family house and in a mixed use. So I would say that there are aspects of mixed use that aren't super clear in the code, like the CDP sort of encourages mixed use, and you get into the code, and Matt's laughing a little bit here, but there are things that are not crystal clear. So we are trying to move forward with our best foot, with our best interpretation, in close consultation with the town and with the authorities, and now with you. So, I understand that there might be some questions about how you apply some of the zoning code aspects to a mixed-use project.
Did you want to talk about the site plan in particular, or even the specific properties? I know we can go over 413 if you just wanted to go through one of the designs just to describe sort of the concept and the residential over retail.
Right, so each, I guess if you're looking up that way, if you look on the upper left, or I guess start on the upper right, on the ground level, each of these properties has a porch that's about 12 feet deep in the front. It has room for 2 parking spaces, deep enough where the cars can pull forward and not be out on the street and right in front of the commercial. And then it has a residential entry, a residential elevator, and then down the side, a place where the trash can be stored for both the residential and the commercial uses. So the trash would be taken out from totes down the side of each building and out to the street. All 3 of these buildings have a 7-foot setback to the rear. I guess it's a required because it's abutting a residential zone to be 5 feet minimum. We've provided 7 feet, so there's room for some landscaping and a walkway back there for service and for emergency egress, but we don't see much activity back there making any noise or anything. I guess all of the commercial opens to the Rehoboth Avenue side. None of it opens to backyard. There's no rear yard courtyards. There's no potential that someone's going to have a restaurant with a courtyard in back against the residential side. The property on Wilmington, the 48 Wilmington, is similar in the sense that it backs up to a residential neighborhood. We had to face those same issues. In fact, Mr. Pomerantz himself owned the house that was in the backyard of that project and was very sensitive to his neighbors and friends who lived up and down that street. I know it's always some some tensions when the residential backs up to a, excuse me, a very active commercial strip. All three buildings, if you look to the lower right, are proposed to have partial basements where we have some flexibility in achieving the FAR. In a preliminary review, we came to realize that since the basements are tied to the commercial, they do count towards the FAR, but they're adjustable in their size. So we can easily dial in the FAR by just adjusting the size of the basement. We're fractionally off on those calculations right now. The residences are all like a main floor with a bedroom or two. I guess they all have 2 bedrooms on the second level, and then they all have 3 bedrooms on the third level. We have come to an understanding over the last project and these that the way we would define 1.5 stories being allowed for residential is that the upper floor has to be no greater than 50% of the square footage of the middle floor. And all of them meet that. Yeah, I think that they all have the parking space. They all have some space between the buildings on that upper level. I guess there's a question that came up in the report from the consultant about whether decks are allowed in this, whether residential decks are allowed in the setback. It's something that was allowed on Wilmington in that project. I think it'd be a reasonable conversation to have here, whether that's interpreted that way here. We can certainly adjust it if we need to. There's nothing about that that would stop the project or change it from what's proposed, other than just eliminating some of the deck areas.
And I would add, we looked at the, obviously 48 was approved this way, and all the conversations that were had with building and licensing suggested that, we were good with those decks. To Jeff's point, it's certainly less than clear on what the code requires for a second floor residential and a mixed use. It talks about the side yard setbacks, for example, in a mixed use structure that's in commercial. The tier 1 has to comply with the setbacks, but the issue is, in our case, there is no yard. It's already covered by a structure at the ground floor level. So you can't go back and recreate a side yard when the side yard's already got a building built upon it. And so that's where we were with that deck calculation. And I would say there's some basis, and aside from 48 Wilmington, there's a basis for that in the zoning code. Actually, when you look at 27020, which deals with height regulations, but for whatever reason, Part B of that talks about stepped back commercial on streets other than Rehoboth Avenue. And, when it talks about a stepped back structure, which would be, in our case, residential over retail, it doesn't talk about setbacks or side yards. It actually says a rear angled step back line. It talks about the step back line of the buildings or structures facing Rehoboth Avenue shall begin at 24 feet. So it's one of those areas where we knew what had been approved before. There was discussions with building and licensing. We thought we were good with that. The code suggests that you have to comply with the setbacks for R1 and a mixed use if you're on the ground level, because then there would be an open yard. But if you're on a building that encloses that yard legally on commercial, that you wouldn't have those same setbacks apply anymore if you're on the second floor. Honestly, there's some logic to that too. It just strikes me as if you could have a commercial structure that goes all the way up with no setbacks, 2 or 3 stories, with more intensive commercial uses. Why would you penalize less intensive residential in commercially zoned property, make them further back, on the second and third floor? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I do understand if you were building, for example, a home in the commercially zoned property and it was just solely residential, you would want that house to comply with the residential setback requirements. That way, somebody couldn't get an end around about the setback requirements that everybody else for a house has to comply with in the residential districts by building a giant house in commercial just because they're in commercial. I understand that, but here where we're talking about the second floor that's already covered with legally permissible structures, And again, coupled with 48 Wilmington being designed, approved, and built, that's where we kind of were. But as Jeff mentioned, if the decks are at issue, that's something I think collectively as a group and with Matt, we can work through. So I don't see that as being any sort of showstopper for anybody. Since this is concept review and since we've had the plans in since April and you all have seen them, Matt and Wallace Montgomery have seen them, we're not going to go through each and every dimension and everything else on the plans. You know, I think more constructive use of our time at this point would be to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you, sir. Susan?
Yes. Did you give any consideration to joining the lots and treating this as one project? Because the discussion today seems like this is one application, and it's a little confusing to me. So this is a concept review for 3 applicants. So if you did give consideration, why did you reject that? As were there material benefits that you thought were conferred by treating these as individual applicants?
So there's a couple answers, and I'm gonna let these two, but I will say, so it came to me as 3 separate lots. They were subdivided, and the design was done. And I came into it after they'd already had preliminary conversations with building and licensing. We made the decision, because there was a conversation, do we do one of these at a time or all 3 at the same time? And I will say that was sort of I don't want to say strategic, but a common sense approach, because we thought that if we came in with just one of them, the natural obvious question was, well, what's going on in the other 2? And so, not to mention there's some economy of doing them all 3 at the same time, but really the driving force in my guidance to them was to do all 3 of them at the same time. That way everybody knows what's going there, and there's not any, well, what are you, wink and a nod, what are you doing on the other 2 lots or other 1 lot? It just seemed like it was more transparent to come in, at all the same time. And I would say they're 3 separately owned structures, and maybe Jeff can talk to the fact that, 3 separately owned lots. We lose some of the design characteristics we've talked about if those 3 lots are merged and it's one big building. Then it just sort of becomes, a commercial 3 or 4 bay condo, with 4 or 5 storefronts in it. So I don't know, Jeff, if you want to.
Dave should address it. That's how it was presented from the get-go.
So it's a great question.
Would you state your name for the record, sir?
Dave McCarthy, I'm the owner of the property.
Thank you.
It's a great question. So I live here, I live in town, and as you all do too, and it's a small town, and, I try to approach this whole thing very delicately. And one of the things I thought would happen, because as far as a business person, it would be safer, and it actually would be easier for me to do one at a time. As far as getting a commercial tenant in downtown, I could do one, get one up and running, then do the second. And then I thought, living here as long as I lived here, people are going to be like, well, what happens to the other 2 if you do the one? And then I knew the rumor mill would start, and people would be like, oh, well, if this one gets approved, what's going to happen with the other ones? I was like, you know what? We should just give everybody, the community, whether we build all 3 right away, we should just give them what the grand plan is. So I did that more out of living here a long time, knowing that there'd be a lot of scratching heads trying to figure out if you're just doing one, what's going to go on the next one. So I had a bunch of restless nights. I'm like, I think we should just bring all 3 to you guys and show you what, ultimately what the plan is. So that was really how we ended up doing one, but it would have been safer for me to do one at a time, but I think it would have left the community with a lot of questions and a lot of scratching heads. So,
Thank you. Did you look at parking in terms of commercial parking, customers coming to your locations? Because I was there for Clear Space, and that was a big topic. What type of parking do you think you'll need for the commercial use?
So I'm going to let Jeff handle that, because that was a big topic of discussion, I understand, between Mr. Janis and Mr.
No, I think my understanding with pretty much all the commercial spaces I've done work for Candy Kitchen and for with the South Moon Under project in Rehoboth. There's lots of on-street parking, lots of people ride bikes and walk, and the code doesn't require commercial parking for this scale and type. It
I
also
understand
doesn't-
that, but there was concern
I mean, they're
previously.
not big lots. These are 50 by 100 lots. I mean, you
Right.
could, if you had the whole lot was empty, you could only fit about 8 or 9 cars on it. So there's just not, it's not, you know, they're not significant size lots that could fit a lot of cars.
But maybe parking is the wrong term, maybe it's traffic. What type of transient customer come, go, stop, start? You're at the Circle, there's a lot of, particularly in the summertime, there's a lot of congestion there. What did you see when you looked at that?
It's, we haven't done any traffic studies or anything. I think that we're not sure what the tenants would be. It's general commercial space that would be available for rent like many of the other spaces on the street. I do think if I look at it, people are approaching the Circle from the east, heading there if they're going to these properties. So anybody backed up along there to try to look for parking for these properties wouldn't back up into the Circle and cause congestion there. They might cause congestion back to the east. But I just assume that it's all, you know, the way Rehoboth works is there's lots of parking down the middle of Rehoboth Avenue, and lots of people walk from the neighborhoods to serve these commercial businesses.
The other thing is, kind of back to the other question, is that, you know, keep in mind that this is not the scale of clear space by any stretch. And it's also not the scale of clear space that's going to have events where there's going to be lots of cars all at once, like you would in an event venue like that. The other thing is that, you know, had we combined all three of these into one structure, you know, there could have been, as I mentioned, sort of a strip approach, which would have had more commercial units. If you think of where like Dunkin' Donuts is on the avenue, that's 5 or 6 commercial units all in a row, probably on about the same width of a lot. If you combined all three of these, it would be more of an intensive use. Here, we get much smaller commercial uses. If you think of I hope I'm not mispronouncing this, but the Weath Home place, it's right next door, which is mixed use. And you might say they have more parking, but they actually have 2 residential units. If you go by there, there's residential on the top, and then there's a little, it's not a garage apartment, but there's a little cottage in the back. So they have the parking for the residential. But, you know, that was something that there was a lot of thought given to. And the fact of the matter is it's code compliant with the parking that's here. So, but I think it's important, as I said, we're not overburdening these properties with commercial. Like, well, I don't want to say that clear space did. I don't want to say that wrong, but it's something that's much more intensive than, you know, like clear space.
I think that, you know, given the example we've shown on that, the building with the Hunting Lane store in there, if you could imagine, the size of the commercial here is about 3 of those, right? So if it's retail, if it's boutique, if it's art gallery, I mean, the intensity of use in these kind of things is nothing like a theater.
Right.
No.
And I would say if you talk to the people who have businesses on the west side of Rehoboth Avenue, they want something down Rehoboth Avenue like this that's pedestrian friendly to get people walking from where they've parked on the east side down to the west side too. So,
And tying it to the previous question, you know, if these were joint properties and someone could have a much larger business, it might be more of an issue. By keeping them separate and having a parking space and a kind of alleys between each one, it's going to by nature keep it to 3 more modest-sized businesses.
I have a question about the use, actually more for the residential, because you've talked a lot about the commercial use and the tenants and all of that. Has there been any thought given to restricting the residential use? In other words, is it going to be a vacation rental? Is it going to be reserved for full-time rentals and maybe employees, or affordable housing at all? Or has any thought been given to that?
not at this point, because we're still trying to get through this process.
I realize maybe ahead of the game. I'm just curious.
I think I would say that putting residential, mixed use drives, I would say, more lowercase affordable housing, not uppercase affordable housing, because it's more affordable if that's an apartment or even a condominium than, if you're doing a single family home, on the north or south side of Rehoboth. But that hasn't been determined. There's 100% a need for that.
Absolutely, that's why I
And I would
asked.
imagine too, honestly, I don't know, Mr. McCarthy, at some point when he builds these, one of the other reasons they're three separate, one is that they could individually be sold at some point. So if somebody had commercial on the bottom and they wanted housing for their employees on top, that would give them the option to do that as well.
Mr. Ellison.
First of all, speaking as the only architect up here,
I don't know if that's good or bad. I feel like here it comes.
well, but also I was the only architect on about a 15-person panel who produced the design manual.
Right,
So
I know, yeah.
I very much appreciate your your interest in it, and I also appreciate the design, the attempt to maintain all of those design principles, and I think you've done a pretty good job of it. Now, I do have an issue that really has nothing to do with, with the code, but it does have to do with parking. It seems to me very clear, and maybe this is more to Mr. McCarthy, that these apartments have been designed with 5 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. The design imperative seems to me was to maximize the number of sleeping rooms, bedrooms, and to do so even at the expense of the common areas, the living room that is intended to seat about 4 people, according to the sketches here, when you could have up to 10 adults, in the bedrooms. But the impact of that, as we have found out in the city of Rehoboth Beach, with our what we call mini hotels, which are also 5-bedroom houses, each bedroom with its own bath, is that you end up often with more than the 2 cars that you have properly placed in accordance with code on each one of these properties. We could end up with maybe up to 5 cars. I have one down the street with me right now, and when it is rented, we have 5 or 6 SUVs vying for spaces both on the property and, of course, across several neighbors' properties surrounding the house. And I'm very concerned because we could end up here with up to 15 vehicles just for the residential if they are short-term rentals to large groups of either family or friends. And that doesn't even account for the vehicles that are necessary for the employees and the visitors or customers to the commercial. So what'll happen to those 9+ cars is that they'll go up and around, the Royal Farms and end up on Columbia or Sussex Street right behind the property. And, that is a concern that the Planning Commission is supposed to take into account, not as a code issue, of course, but as an issue of impact on neighborhood. So I don't know whether there are any comments you have on that, but that does concern me a great deal.
Just, Mr. McCarthy, real quick, my only comment, I'm going to let him handle the design side of it. The lawyer side of it says that that's an issue that we have in Rehoboth Beach across the board. That what you just described applies to every residential zoning district in the city of Rehoboth Beach. And therefore, that's not an issue that my client should be singled out for to address. That's something that should be addressed in the code for residential parking. So that's the lawyer side of it. I'll let Mr. McCarthy, if he wants to add anything.
No, I appreciate, the feedback. Look, I've lived here a long time now, 20 years, and I know that everyone's very sensitive, with the rentals, and I've been here long enough, and, my business is in town, so I understand everyone's concerns. When I decided to buy this from ClearSpace, I just kind of wanted to give something. I thought it was a great location, that something really neat could be built there. But I also had to figure out what would be most appealing to the community, look-wise. I didn't want any controversy. I was trying to just get this thing done, give everybody kind of what they wanted. But when I really scrubbed the code and looked at the code, and we met with Matt, Susan had brought up workhouse, living and stuff like that. We looked at all that. The issue is the code doesn't provide for that. So understand me as a business person, I can't wait around 4 or 5 years for the city to decide to allow, apartments or workhouse living, above it and come up with a different concept. Obviously in my business, the longer something goes on, it has a financial impact. So my whole thing is I just wanted to bring something to the city and do a great project that was code compliant. And looking around, especially that whole side of Rehoboth Avenue, Houston White building, all the buildings all the way up, that's what they all are. They're all commercial on the bottom, and a lot of them are 3, 4, 5 bedroom units above. And actually, the houses that were there before that were taken down by ClearSpace, there was a home above and a business below. So I'm not really doing anything different other than what the rest of the commercial area is doing. I'm trying to deliver something that is appealing to the community. I mean, I can't guarantee what's going to happen with the buildings if I build all 3. What could happen is I could build all 3. Somebody could come along, a business owner, want to buy the building, put his commercial workshop or art studio downstairs and live above. I mean, that's a possibility. I don't know what the future will bring with it, but I think it's right in the keeping with the city of Rehoboth and everything that commercially is in that area. I mean, it's no different if you look on that entire side of the street. That's what all those buildings are, is commercial downstairs and residential homes upstairs. But I do understand your concern. And I just don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And that was kind of why I wanted to bring, like I said before, I wanted to bring all 3 to you guys, because I didn't want you to bring one and then you're like, well, then what's going to happen with the other 2 lots? So, but I wish I had a crystal ball and I knew exactly what would happen, in the future. But again, we're just trying to give the best product we can to the city.
I understand that. It just seems to me, however, that if you were designing for someone to live there, let's say on an annual basis, and make it a home, you would not design it the way these are designed, with 5 bedrooms. Some of the bedrooms don't even have closets, and which limits the overall general space in the house. You design it somewhat differently, but
to that point, sir, as far as like refining them, putting closets and stuff in, we will do more of that as it gets a little farther. This is, just kind of concept review, so we didn't go into it that deep. Again, touching on that whole 5 bedroom, 5 bath, which is, everyone's very sensitive to. Unfortunately, even in residential, I mean, that's what people want, whether it brings too much parking or not. But I mean, I can't tell you on the building, the residential building side, the last time somebody's come to me and not wanted 5 bedrooms and 5.5 baths. It's been, I've been doing this 15, 20 years. It's just what people want. It's what, other than you guys changing the code. I mean, if you change the code, then obviously that will change that. But I mean, that's just what the free market wants out there. I mean, even if somebody was to buy that building from me, and that would want to live above, they want those bedrooms, whether they convert one into an office and have, the 4 bedrooms and stuff. It's just what the market wants. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. It's just that's what the market wants. And, like I've said before, too, with all the controversy in town, I mean, if you tell me and you pass codes that tell me I can only have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, I'll build it. I mean, I don't have, I mean, you just understand where
this isn't really a code issue.
Yeah.
It's a design intent.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. But I mean, I understand the struggle and the concern with the parking and the rentals. I get it. I certainly understand. That's all. Thank you.
I have a factual question, I guess. I understand that you are providing the 2 parking places on each of these 3 lots to meet the requirements of the code regarding residential uses. what, if anything, is going to be done to ensure that those two parking places are reserved exclusively for the residents of the upstairs, if you will, apartments, as opposed to having both customers of the shops or diners of the restaurant or even staff of the commercial areas use those parking places instead of the residents?
I think it would just be simply signage. It would certainly be in any kind of sales or lease agreements that would be made clear depending on how it goes.
It's for the residential.
It's, you know,
Well, I
it
know
would
it's
be-
intended for the residential.
I mean, there would be towing if somebody parks there that's not allowed to park there. It would be well marked.
And we certainly don't have any objection if this moves forward to the end of the day, that being a condition of approval, that there be signage. And we even show the type of signage on the final site plan. So that way there's no controversy and everybody knows what it is. No, but that's a fair question and one I hadn't thought of, but thank you.
Anyone else?
Just in terms of, first, what businesses are a part of the vision plan as compared to what businesses may be somebody else's vision if the buildings were ever sold. Specifically, it sounds as if relatively low-intensity retail is what is primarily being considered. The higher end, the better, from some of the descriptions I'm hearing. But there are also relatively high-end and middle-grade restaurants in those same blocks. Is that even the hint of a possibility for a future use?
Well, again, it's commercial, so, you know, by code, whatever's permitted in commercial would be allowed to go there. However, the way these are designed, and again, I'm going to let Dave come up, but they're small enough. Like, again, if this was 3 combined lots, I mean, you could get a dogfish in there, and that would be a high-intensity type resident or restaurant use, which we have, you know, a little bit further east across the street. Here, these are small enough that if it would be tough to get a restaurant in there, for example, just based on, you know, it's designed so there's not room for dumpsters. You know, there's not room for the kinds of things, you know, that go along with more high-intensity restaurant uses. So they lend themselves to maybe lower intensity, you know, I don't know, pastry shops or something like that maybe, or coffee shop, yeah, but not the resident or the restaurant type of use. It's more, I think it'd be more retail or, you know, like maybe a realtor's office or an art gallery, that sort of thing. Dave, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
The idea was to have like boutique type, if, you know, commercial, whether it be a coffee shop or a restaurant or art gallery. That was kind of the feel. You know, I think right now that part of Rehoboth Avenue, like Egg and a lot of the other small businesses up there and stuff, I don't see like an ocean block type of person, like a t-shirt shop. I don't see that going there. I see more like art galleries or a little clothing boutique, or things like that. That's what I imagine in the space. So, thanks.
Anyone else?
No,
Mr.
Mr. Chair,
Strange?
you're entertaining questions strictly for the applicant as opposed to Matt and Wallace Montgomery?
It was coming to Matt next.
Oh, okay.
It's your lucky day, Matt.
Thanks, Chair.
No, I know that you did not prepare, you prepared a,
I just have one more point to make, and it's similar to the one I made earlier about Mr. Schulman's letter. Attached to our agenda is a letter received from Win Axenbaum, who is a property owner in Rehoboth. And, excuse me, because this is concept review, back of the envelope time, I'm not going to raise any of the issues in that letter, but I would suggest that you all look at it, because I think many, if not all, of her observations are valid questions about the property as it's ultimately designed. And I think you would do well to at least consider the contents of the letter and the points she raises.
Yeah, we have. No, we just saw it. You know, and some of them are things that I think we can address to some degree. Some of them I think are more questions than comments, if you will. But I have to say, some of them also are asking us to do things that are not code required. You know, I mean, and I don't mean to diminish her letter, we're going to take it all into account, but, you know, there's a fine line between, you know, trying to restrict what could go there when things that are commercially allowed can go there, versus, you know, just, you know, some of the things that she's raised in her letter, so.
I don't disagree with you, but as Mr. Ellis had said, there's more to site plan review than just code compliance.
Well, I will tell you, the lawyer in me would disagree with that to some extent, because we have cases here in Delaware that talk about that. You know, that really with site plan reviews, there's some leeway, but if it complies with what the code says, it complies with what the code says. I know Mr. Mendelis knows that. I'm sure Mr. Mehta knows that. I don't mean to diminish your all's responsibility, but it's not a wide open discretionary review that any planning commission, I don't mean to single out Rehoboth Planning Commission, any planning commission has, you know, there's some guardrails on that, that, you know, you need to keep in mind legally based on Delaware jurisprudence, so.
Anyone else?
Since that letter was mentioned, I did want to ask you, is the idea to have just one commercial business per unit?
I guess I could address that. I mean, the spaces are designed that they could either be one or two. And it's about 3,000 square feet of commercial. The frontage, there's not enough frontage to have more than two. And it was the same way the one at 48 Wilmington was designed. It was designed with like a double door near the middle so that you could either have a wall down the middle and have two 1,500 square foot spaces, or you could have one 3,000 square foot space.
And I think that was in the I'm just trying to review it quickly. There was a question in about the size of the water lines and maybe the water metering. That didn't, just so you all know, that was an engineering discussion that had nothing to do with the types of uses. It had to do with the most efficient connections to the existing city water mains in context of the city's public works department.
Well, the other bigger thing there is all these buildings need to be fully sprinklered and sprinkler protected with the residences upstairs over commercial. So the size of the water meter that's shown, I see Mr. Ellison nodding here, is what you need for the sprinkler system, not what you need for a bigger commercial use.
Anyone else? Nick Walls. Sir. Wallace Montgomery and the building inspector filed a joint report in?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay, who's the lead for that report? Who's the lead contact?
I'm going to let Mr. Janis take the lead, as he has,
somehow I thought that.
he has the measured values.
So considering this is a concept review, is it appropriate to read that report today?
Oh, are we going to read all three of the reports? I would just submit, we've read them. I hope you have. They're on the, I know.
Can you focus on any issues that you might have?
Yeah. I don't want to diminish Mr. Janis's role here, but I don't want to be here till 10 either.
This lawyer happens to be here, so I'm.
Yeah, all right.
You give me a moment, Mr. Chair, I'll pull up my reports here.
And Mr. Robertson, the idea is if there are issues that can be brought up and you can answer, it's a good time to do that.
No, I totally agree with that. I know the reports are.
It's in the context of the language that the chair read from the code at the commencement of.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just in the instance of time, I didn't think we needed to read 6-page reports either 3 times. Yeah.
Just to highlight whatever.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that.
And some of which you've indicated you're going to address anyway, like height and FAR, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And decks, balcony.
Well, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, well, I don't know, we'll hear from Matt on that, but, yeah. And honestly, I think they're all the same on all three. I mean, the numbers may be off a little bit, but it's the same issues.
And that was my reading, yes.
All right, for 413 Rehoboth Avenue, if everyone has the reports in front of them, as I did with some,
I don't want to interrupt you. Would it be helpful to display your report on the?
if it would be helpful with everyone else, yes,
I
absolutely.
think we can do that.
I got it.
Thank you, Vince.
Do you have the, I think you've got the.
Be up there with WM and BI reports for,
Oh,
Yep.
right at the top.
there you
Gotcha.
go.
There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You might want to blow that up,
Yeah.
Vince. If you want me to, give me the clip.
Sure.
I could certainly take the podium. In interest of time, I think we'll skip the meat and just get into the issues, which we've outlined in red for each one of the reports separately. So if we take a look at page 5, we bring to light the issues of the required side yard setbacks with the rear yard depth of 10 foot for the residential use. And again, we get muddy here because of the lack of mixed-use coding. Required would be a Tier 3 use for the commercial would be the 5-foot setback from the residential abutting lot. We have actual 6'10" to the second floor decking. The required of a R2 would be a 10-foot setback. The minimum side yard setback would be 10 foot for the Tier 1 use, and a 4-foot is what we actually have represented on the plans to the stairwell on the east and 0 to the deck on the west. The minimum aggregate total would be 20 feet. We have a 4-foot proposed minimum aggregate here for the Tier 1 use only. The building height as shown for 413, it measures from the center line of the road is 40 feet 5 inches from the indicated center line of the road. Floor area ratio, there was 2 comments associated. Per the building official's calculations, the total building's total FAR is 2.09. Which exceeds the maximum FAR allowed by code by 0.09, which is a total 426 square feet. And then skip down a little bit. Also note that on sheet A 2.1 of the design group's drawings, the FAR is incorrectly calculated by 2.99. Using their figures, it should be 1.99. So that's just a typographical error. Rear yard comment, the design group's sheet A2.1 second floor plan shows the deck, which can be accessed solely from the apartment unit at a distance of 6 foot 10 inches from the rear property line. For side yards, the design group's sheet A2.1 second floor plan shows the stairwell to access the apartment unit at a distance of 4 feet from the eastern property line, and the deck, which can be accessed solely from the apartment unit at a distance of 0 feet from the westerly property line. Should the deck's distance be addressed, the remainder of the second floor apartment is only 8 feet from the western property line, as is bedroom 4 shown on the third floor plan. The information shown in the height, area, and bulk table on the site plan for the minimum side yard for the apartment use incorrectly states 6-foot minimum, 16-foot aggregate. This is the minimum in a commercial district for uses found in an R1 zone. The correct side yard requirements to use are for all other Tier 1 uses and would be 10-foot minimum, 20-foot aggregate. Going to page 7, signs. Just one standard comment there is that all signage obviously must obtain a separate permit approved by the Building and Licensing Department. And that are the major points for 413 application.
And again, I think that's the same, Matt, for all 3 of them. So, I mean, the numbers may be a little bit different.
I believe you're correct, Vince. The comments are relatively the same throughout. Heights, square footage calculations, signage, they all, obviously are a trigger of a comment.
So are you then saying that the setbacks are an issue?
We believe they are.
Okay. Because you said at the beginning of the discussion that they weren't spelled out for mixed use, but actually in the footnotes, it appears that they are, which clearly says Tier 1 uses within a mixed-use structure shall meet the required setbacks. So is that the basis? That's the basis on which you were saying it does not comply?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And in addition to that, because I think Mr. Robertson had mentioned the fact that the first floor goes out a certain amount, but in addition to that, the line in the code that each story or part of a building shall be set back from the street so as to comply, that is part of your thinking as well?
Correct.
Okay, I can understand that.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
Yeah, I guess I would point out in the code what maybe has led us to some confusion, besides the fact that none of this was brought up when we did it the last time in 2018. I just want to be clear that when the report says that the setback is 6'10" and not 10 feet in the rear yard, that's to the deck, it's not to the building. The building portion, the screen porches, everything is compliant with the 10 feet. The front yard setback, it's 10 feet and the slope setback is met from the street, so there's no issues with the front setback anywhere. And the side yard setbacks, I guess I just want to point out in your code, and maybe you guys could look at this with us. When you look at the front and the back yard setback, there is the footnote that says mixed use shall apply this way, but when you look at the side yard setback, it says that under commercial uses R1 is a 6 and 16, not a 10 and 10, and then it says below that, all other Tier 1 uses. The way I've understood that, and what we believe since we did it before, was that the setback is 6 feet, minimum, and 16. So I guess I'm happy to have the conversation. I'd like you all to look at it. I just don't know why it's written differently for side yards as it is for front and rear. It's very clear front and rear, and we're compliant other than the decks. So I see it as two issues. One is a deck that's on a roof of a commercial structure before need to meet the front, rear, and side yard setbacks? If that's the case, we can take the decks off and satisfy that. It seems kind of a waste because, as Vince said, the building below is going to extend beyond that. The second question is, how's that read in your code for the side yard setbacks? I believe that we have a reasonable way that we interpreted it. It sounds like that they disagree with that, but I don't know. If it says all other Tier 1 uses, I don't know what the one it's referring to at 6 and 16 would be if it's not for a residence there.
It says R1.
But it says it's under commercial district. So I just guess I presumed that that meant that that was a single-family building in a commercial district, and I don't know why it would say, do you know what I'm saying there? I just don't know why it would say all other Tier 1 uses if it's not referring to one use that is allowed to be at that setback. You could at least see where we didn't just ignore the code. We reviewed it 3 or 4 times with Mr. Janis. We didn't change any of that, but that's where we were getting it from. I just want to be clear that we had some basis.
And it was approved and built that way, yeah.
Previously, yeah.
Were you here when the 48 Wilmington was approved?
I was not the
You were not, you did not.
reviewer of
Okay,
that
okay.
application. And I just want to point out 27013C1 district that gives the Tier 1 uses is actually the R2 district, not the R1. Just a point of clarification.
And so I guess I raised an interesting question about the decks that I wrote down earlier to ask, and that is, are decks allowed in the setback?
No structures, and if this was a residential application strictly,
Yeah.
no structures would be allowed in the side or rear or front yard setbacks.
Setback, okay.
That's one that it's weird to me. I think we can comply because the commercial is allowed, and this is the roof of the commercial, and you gotta have a roof on a commercial, so the structure's allowed. To make it not a deck, like Jeff was saying, we can remove the fences, push those back, not put doors or anything.
But the deck is for the residential use only. It's not meant to be for the business use,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
But
It
it's
is
not-
part of
It's
it.
not critical to the
Yeah.
application.
Okay.
You all
And,
don't
and so then that brings up the other question is that the only fix that would be needed from your point of view, in order to fix the setback issue?
I believe that would probably, one moment. That's right. So we still had, yes, the removal of the decks would solve the deck issue. However, we still had the problems with the entryways being beyond the setback requirements. So the entryways, so the massaging of the space is going to be necessary, obviously, for the floor area ratio to come down. So I believe that they could also massage the entryways to allow for, you know, a proper setback
So you think
adherence.
it's fixable in that?
I absolutely do.
Okay. I guess the other
Can
thing.
I ask you a question just with fixable? Because, you know, one of the things we want is to, you know, so we don't go round and round on this. We want it to look nice, you know, and one of the things we showed is I think it looks nice is if you have those fences on the top. I guess this is a question to Matt. Can we keep the fences and eliminate the or railings? Yeah, not fences, railings, and eliminate the access. So architecturally, it's there on Rehoboth Avenue. I mean, we won't if we can't, but and just not have it accessible. I'm looking at Ms. Gay, but it's really a question to Mr. Janice. Just, I figure while we're here, that's a good clarification.
Do you want to put up your picture of what you're referring to?
Yes, please.
That would be
I'm not
helpful.
sure that we'll get a resolution of that today. We're trying to identify issues.
Become an
I mean,
embellishment.
Yeah, that's right, it's just an embellishment.
have you considered getting a variance for?
Oh, the embellishment.
Only because we didn't want to, we wanted to build something that was code compliant, you know, so.
No, but
Yeah.
And I
me
was going to
find
ask
it.
something else about the decks allowed. Oh, Matt, is it at all an issue that there is actual residential use on the first floor with that vestibule and the elevator? Does that complicate things at all?
Yeah.
It's a residential use, I'm just asking.
The residential use needs some kind of entryway.
Right?
So we've got to get into the property somehow. It is included in the residential calculations.
Oh, okay.
But if that area was massaged to the required setback requirements, it's not an issue.
Okay, okay.
It's, you know, this is an editorial comment. That's weird to me because you could have that same space occupied by
I understand,
commercial.
just asking the question.
No, I'm not
We
critical.
have
I'm
to
just-
apply different codes.
Yeah,
Just
it's just,
asking the question.
it's one of those things in the code that's just quirky, so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
no,
may-
I don't mean that as a challenge, it's just an observation.
Yeah,
that
we
it's
may not
just-
resolve these questions
No, I
today,
know. Yeah,
but we
I-
wanted to at least
Can you point out
start
where
the
we're talking
discussion.
about?
If you look at the middle section, or the middle building, I think it gives you the best interpretation. On the left-hand picture, you can see down the alleyway that looks to be some type of door structure there.
Oh, right there,
Yeah, right there, exactly. That looks to be the residential entrance for the second and third floors, or second and a half floors.
And then like the deck fences, you can see, I think, Matt, are like right here, and then also, and I keep calling them fences, railings over here as well. And they're kind of along in there.
But again, the ones on the front yard are fully compliant. They're
Yeah.
well within the setback. It's only the sides
Yeah.
that would get eliminated
This
or
one,
pulled
like right
in.
here.
And the decks that we were referring to, are they on the opposite side of this rendering?
There's side yard decks and there are rear yard decks that are, the side yard decks, depending on what the setback is. The side yard decks, depending on, some of them are zero lot lines, some of them are 4 feet back. But if they had to be 6 to 10 feet back,
You can kind of see here.
it
this
would,
is-
yeah, it's all shaded, it's shaded in pink there. And the one in the rear, which is 6'10", would have to be 10 feet to be compliant, so it could be shaved back by 3 feet and be compliant. The building below would still stick out that far. We don't want to give up commercial space for that, but we could pull the deck back if that's an issue. I just,
Mr. Strange?
yeah.
Thank you. This is a comment not related to the content, but you and I were talking yesterday about styles, and we joked about, you know, you technically could do things in goth or steampunk if you wanted, and I'm thankful that you didn't. This is a very nice interpretation.
That's what we did all three at once, so nobody. The second one was God and Steampunk.
My question is actually either to Matt or Wallace Montgomery. When I was looking at this, the problem I had these were three separate submittals for three separate individual lots, yet they are unitized together and not done as a singular lot. And my concern is, in looking at the code, under general provisions 270-3 and then the definitions on 270-4, you have to comply with both the commercial code and the residential code for a mixed use. Now, I agree with you that our mixed use concept is not very good compared to other urban environments. But because these are three separate lots, you have to meet all those standards in both. And in my looking at this, quite frankly, it would disagree with what Wallace and Montgomery and Matt have done. It doesn't add up because you have to comply to both of those. And these are three separate. If it was one lot, the dynamics would change a little bit. And you could do more or less what you want to do. But the fact that these are being done as three separate individual properties, the rules are different. And I'm conceptually having difficulty
in
with
terms
that.
of
So I'm
FAR
addressing it to everybody. I don't think under the current code, you can do what you want to do and still meet the code.
So I disagree with that. I mean, I think the code would be the same, whether it's 150 by 100 or 350 by 100. It's the same setbacks apply, the same FAR
But it's
calculations.
under all of our rules apply to a singular ownership of the property, and that's what affects things. Just as like with the hotel, you're unitizing lots.
Well, right, but I mean, theoretically, I hear what you're saying, but if it was 150 by 100 lot, we wouldn't have any internal setbacks. We wouldn't be talking about the setbacks on the insides of those three structures. It would just be the outsides.
But there's only one structure allowed on a lot if it were one lot.
Exactly, and so we'd have much greater density than what we have here because it would be a much bigger structure that doesn't have the same embellishments that these three do. I hear what you're saying, but I think the code still applies. It's just on a bigger lot, which gives you a much bigger scale. I mean, I think we would end up just with the parameters and losing setbacks. I mean, we still have to deal with the FAR, but we'd end up with a bigger, bulkier building. And no separation between the two.
I'm curious what it is that doesn't apply because, that doesn't comply, because we have designed each lot so that it meets there's a separate FAR for residential, which is 0.6, and we've met that. And there's an overall lot, which we've added the FAR for the residential plus the commercial under 2.0, and it's met that. And these issues of the setbacks are applying to the deck, not so much the building with maybe some minor adjustments. So I'm curious what parts of it you think don't comply because of this.
Let me just caution, if I may, again, this is not the time to reach any determinations one way or the other.
Just for
So
guidance,
I
I'm
understand
curious
your
what they
question.
are.
I'm just more
Yeah.
cautioning the answer. This is a time for issue spotting, not issue resolution.
Yeah, just asking for a little more specificity of the issues.
Well, for example, as was, there are three separate individual parcels.
Mike, I need for you to
Oh,
sit closer.
there are three separate individual parcels. And even though they're under one ownership, they could be under three separate ownerships. But it turns out they're not.
No, they are. They're three separate ownerships. I mean, I keep talking about Mr. McCarthy, but there's three separate entities that own.
Right, there's three separate entities, it's not unified as a single entity. And they're presented as such. However, when you look at the physical structures, they are physically connected together.
They're actually not.
They all have some setback to each other, and the commercial part meets the zero lot line, but they also meet a dimension that we found is practical as far as structural, so that the foundations aren't combined or anything and the walls are separated. I mean, they could literally be built separately, each building.
At least in the drawings that I saw, it looked as if they were unified at some point.
There is one that's back to back where it's two like 1 foot or 6 inch setbacks with a little gap in between. And then the other ones have like an alley between of at least 4 feet to the 12 feet where the cars park.
Okay, I would still raise, there is a concern, a general statement, as you alluded to, Vince, is that our mixed-use regulations aren't the best. That's a reality, and I wish they were better. But I think currently, as what is proposed in how it's laid out in the drawings that I saw, under 270-4, how we define residential and how we design commercial, we're in a situation where it seems like it doesn't really meet all of them in both cases. And so I'm just raising that as a concern.
All right.
I haven't seen a satisfactory answer yet.
All right. Any,
We're going to get him to quiet down back there.
Already tried.
We weren't invited, I don't think.
Yeah, is there a citywide happy hour or something? Nobody
I
told us.
believe it's the Art League reviewing their art. I tried to get Margaret to move them into the caucus room, but no dice.
So I think we've had an important discussion. We have some issues that I think we'll need some additional information. We are required by the code. We're required to issue a report. Following the project concept review and discussion, the Planning Commission will provide non-binding written comments and suggestions based on its experience, knowledge, technical assistance, and public comments. So you can look forward to that.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. And, you know, I hope that the impression that you're left with today is that we try to do the best we could under our understanding of the code that wouldn't require variances based on what the comp plan said, the design manual said, another building, what the city keeps talking about at once. You know, and just, as I said, try to come up with something that was reasonable and appropriate for that. We look forward to seeing what that report says. It sounds like we have some conversations to have with Matt, you know, dealing with fences and technical details. And then when we're ready to go with that, we'll, after we see your report, be resubmitting plans for preliminary and roll with that.
Let me be so bold as to preview what might be contained in a report. Much of which has already been alluded to here today. I think it is fair to say that all stakeholders, the city, the public, property owners, developers, would benefit from an enhanced code that comprehensively and specifically dealt with mixed-use projects such as what you're proposing. This body doesn't write the laws. This body interprets the existing code. The laws are written by the Board of Commissioners. So in view of the setback for issue, for example, and there may be other issues. So one could imagine that, for example, we might raise a question whether the project complies with the applicable height regulation or the applicable lot coverage regulation. Because what you have here is you have, and this will be one question that we might raise, whether you want to answer it now, when you want to think about it, get back to us, that would be okay too. Is this a tier 1 or is it a tier 3 use, or is it both? And if it's both, what is your rationale for why one should apply and not the other? Our job is to interpret the existing code. I do not believe that our job is, or that the Commission's job is to harmonize and analogize every prior building, whether it's 48 Wilmington or whatever. And that might be useful. It'd be actually more useful, I think, to this body if someone could present to the Planning Commission any sort of statutory analysis that went into whatever approval was made there. Commissioner Strange raised a section of the code that you all may want to take a look at very, very carefully. And that is the scope section of the zoning code, which is 270-3A, which let me just read it to you. The use of all land and any building or portion of a building erected, altered with respect to size and area, added to or relocated, and every use within a building or use accessory thereto shall be in conformity with the provisions, plural, in this chapter. So that is code language. It's in the scope section. It's what introduces the regulated community and the citizens and the commission to the zoning code. So in view of that, we received a report that raises question whether for setbacks is a tier 1, tier 3. There, the code actually is, as one of the commissioners pointed out, the code actually does drop a footnote which provides some direction. But we're going to encourage you, I think, to also, and sooner rather than later, look at lot coverage and height. I'm not talking about the variances of height, but code compliance, 35 feet or 42 feet. Lot coverage, 50% or 100%, in view of this language, 270-3A. Now, again, you don't have to answer this question right now. You may want to think about it. But given the situation that the Planning Commission is in, and I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth, but one way forward, just procedurally, would be for you all to think about whether you want to seek a variance with the Board of Adjustment in respect to any one or all three of these issues. You have, and I'm assuming it's in good faith, it certainly seems to be in good faith to me, that you want to be code compliant.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, just one second.
Yeah.
This body here wants to interpret the existing code. Many people may have a view about what the code should read like one day, but right now we have a project that's subject to the existing code.
So a couple things on that. One is, I agree that we need to be compliant with the code. At this point, we don't have an official determination from the city that we're not code compliant with the height or with lot coverage, should that become an issue. Nobody has said lot coverage is an issue. We don't have anything to require a variance, a request of variance from, or a decision to appeal. And the only person we can appeal that decision from is Mr. Janus, not Wallace Montgomery. Mr. Janus hasn't said that we're not compliant with either one of those things. So there's no standing for us to request a variance at this point. Mr. Janus thinks that we're compliant on those. The other thing, I don't think that we can just toss out 48 Wilmington Avenue in terms of ignore it because that's past history. The city was just recently involved in litigation that went all the way to the Supreme Court based on the ambiguity of the city's own zoning code. There was a determination by Mr. Janus with regard to FAR that went to the Superior Court. The Superior Court upheld the decision, and then the Supreme Court reversed it. And they looked at the fact that there were different interpretations of the code. Basically said tie goes to the runner, tie goes to the property owner. And in that case, Jack Lingo was building a bunch of steps on the back of their property because the Supreme Court said that Rehoboth's codes were ambiguous. I'm not saying that because I want to pick a fight. I don't. Mr. McCarthy certainly doesn't either. What we want to do is work through this. We don't want any gotcha moments. We want to abide by what the code says, how it's been applied, and how it's been applied reasonably. And at this point, as I said, we don't have anything to request a variance from on height or lot coverage because there's not been a determination that we're in violation of either one of those. I think we'd get to the board and they'd say, why are you here? You know, so.
Well, that may be the case on the existing record, but you know, this is project concept review, and
Right.
and that might change by the time we get to a preliminary review or final hearing. And again, the purpose of raising these issues now is, again, the language that the chair read, is before you spend the money and time to put together a plan for preliminary review or final review, we flesh out these issues. So I hear you on the existing record, but I would also still encourage you to consider in good faith the points we are making here.
Oh, absolutely. I don't mean to suggest that we're not going to consider things in good faith. That's certainly not the
So
case.
the
we're
other,
gonna take everything into consideration.
one other point, I think earlier you had raised the issue, and I don't want to get into a dialectic debate here, but just to respond to a comment with regard to this commission's role with regard to site plans. I think the code is here very clear that certainly code compliance with the zoning code compliance is sort of the threshold issue, but every city is different, this city makes it quite clear that in addition to zoning code compliance issues, the Planning Commission is charged affirmatively with looking at, I think, what 2019 or 21 other factors consistent with the general purposes of the zoning code. So it's in that context that I think quite clearly not only is the Planning Commission permitted, but must evaluate a project against these other factors as long as they're generally consistent with the overall purpose of the zoning code in Rehoboth Beach. We're not talking about other cities, we're talking about
Right,
Rehoboth
but
Beach here.
the law is pretty clear that, you know, and that is part of every site plan review everywhere, Mr. Mehta, but you cannot condition a property based on something that applies across the board to everybody in Rehoboth Beach, whether it's everybody who owns commercial property, everybody who owns residential property. You know, we could certainly, I think, and I'll just use this as an example, on a commercial site plan, you could shift things around to have a lesser of an impact on a neighboring or adjacent property. What I don't think will withstand scrutiny is if you say the code says there's 2 parking spaces that were required, just to pick that out, and we're going to impose unilaterally an ad hoc condition on you alone that there's got to be 4 persons there, you know, or parking spaces there. I think we're on the same page.
I
It's just
think we understand what the Delaware law is, but again, I'm just wanted to respond to your, encourage you to look at 230, 630E and the factors
No,
in
I'm familiar with
particular.
it, so, but understood.
All right. Is anyone from the public here to speak today? Now's the time. Please, come forward. All right. I think that concludes our concept review.
Thank you. We got out of here before 4:30 too.
If you want to stay, we can hear from you on some other things.
I'll talk more. Thank you. Well, we appreciate your time and your scrutiny on
Yes,
this.
thank you very much.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Time for reports. Mr. Janis, do you have a building inspector's report?
I believe the reports are embedded in the agenda. I could certainly entertain any questions,
Okay.
should you have any.
Anyone? All right. Mr. Mehta, do you have a report?
No, I don't have any additional information at this point. The only thing I would say is I believe the status of the, and maybe Mr. Mandalis can help me here, the status of the 330 Rehoboth litigation. I believe that's the challenge over the city's determination not to rezone that property. I believe that is in the stages of briefing now on the, now that they finally have agreed on what the record is for the review before the Superior Court. That issue on a motion to dismiss is now being briefed.
Yeah, that's right, Mr. Mehta. The opening brief, I believe, has been filed. I don't have the briefing schedule in front of me, but I think what I recall is that briefing finishes up sometime in December. Probably have oral argument, if the judge wants oral argument, sometime within that next 90 days, as you know, and I'm expecting a decision in that case probably second quarter of 2024.
All right, sir. And in terms of what's on the horizon from the city planner, do you have anything to tell us about any other matter that is coming this way that you're working on at the moment, or?
At this moment, no.
Okay. Yeah. And Womack, do you have any new applications that we need to know about?
None other than the list that I provided to you.
Okay.
Okay, do we have that?
Yes, it was sent out. Mhm. Okay, I think that concludes our agenda. And it's good to see you all again. We're adjourned.